The first time I thought something was off was when I came home and found the front door unlocked, which wasn't that unusual on its own, but it had rained all day and Emily always made a fuss about keeping the floor clean. Yet her boots were still sitting on the welcome mat, dry. There were no wet footprints, no umbrella, nothing. That's when I noticed the second odd thing. Our hallway mirror was gone. Not broken, not crooked, just completely gone. She always hated that mirror, said it was ugly and made her look weird. But still, who takes down a mirror in the middle of the day and doesn't say anything about it? I stood there staring at the empty wall like it was supposed to explain something. And then she called out from the kitchen with that same overly casual voice she used when she was trying to act normal. "Hey babe, didn't hear you come in. Want something to eat?" That was her strategy lately. Overcompensate. Make everything seem fine, more than fine, as if she were suddenly interested in playing house again. I walked into the kitchen and saw her chopping vegetables with way too much focus. She was smiling, humming even, like she was starring in some low-budget cooking show. I noticed her wedding ring was back on her finger. It had been missing for nearly a week, and when I asked about it 3 days ago, she claimed she must have left it at the gym. "I thought you said you lost that," I said, nodding toward her hand. She didn't miss a beat. "Oh yeah? Found it in my car. Slipped under the seat." I didn't say anything. Just grabbed a beer from the fridge and leaned against the counter, watching her move around like she was trying to impress someone. She poured wine for herself, Merlot, even though she usually hated red, and kept making small talk about some recipe she saw online. I wasn't listening anymore. I was staring at her left wrist. She was wearing a new bracelet, one I had definitely never seen before, silver with a small blue charm hanging off it. "You get that today?" I asked. "Hmm?" She replied, without turning around. "That bracelet. New." She hesitated just long enough to confirm everything. "Oh, yeah. Picked it up on the way home. Little treat for myself." I nodded slowly, already filing the detail away with the missing mirror and the dry boots and the mysteriously reappeared wedding ring. That night, I stayed up long after she went to bed. She said she was tired from work and had one too many glasses of wine. Normally, that would mean she'd pass out on the couch, but tonight she made a point of going to bed early, like she wanted to avoid more questions. I sat there on the living room couch, staring at the empty wall where the mirror used to be, and it hit me. She wasn't trying to hide something small. She was trying to erase a trace, something that had been reflected, something she didn't want me to see again. The living room window was opposite that mirror. If someone was standing outside looking in, they'd be reflected perfectly from the kitchen doorway. Or maybe it was the other way around. Maybe she saw something reflected in it, something I wasn't supposed to notice. 2 days later, I had a plan. I came home early from work, told my boss I had a stomach bug, and parked my car 3 blocks away so she wouldn't see it. She thought I worked until 7. That gave me 2 hours. I entered the house through the back, unlocked the side gate like I'd done 100 times before when grilling in the summer. I didn't make a sound. I didn't have to. The moment I opened the kitchen door, I knew something was wrong. The radio was on, softly playing some indie playlist she usually used for creative focus, but she wasn't at her desk. No signs of dinner. No signs of work. I moved through the living room slowly, avoiding the spots where the floor creaked. When I reached the hallway, I heard it. A laugh. Muffled, low, but definitely hers. I paused, waited, then took 2 more steps. The guest room door was closed, something it never was unless someone was staying over, which hadn't happened in months. I heard another voice. A male one. I couldn't make out the words, but it was enough to make my pulse start pounding in my ears. I didn't barge in. I didn't shout. I walked into the laundry room, opened the closet, and turned on the central return vent camera I'd hidden last summer. It was supposed to be for checking on the dog when we left her alone, but I'd never gotten around to installing the second one in the living room. This one, though, faced directly through the hallway vent and picked up audio like a charm. I stood there, headphones on, listening to my wife tell someone that she felt more alive than she had in years, that she couldn't stop thinking about that night, and how she kept picturing his hands on her neck while she cooked dinner with me standing right there. She said it like it was a joke, like I was the punchline. And then I heard it, his voice, laughing with her, saying something about how stupid I must be to not notice that the mirror was reflecting their little makeout session from the kitchen door. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't even race. Everything just stopped. I stood there frozen, headphones still in, watching the little red light blink on the camera, listening to the casual destruction of my life. I didn't cry. I didn't even move. I waited until I heard the door open, the quiet shuffle of clothes, the click of a belt, and the front door closing gently behind him. Then I walked out, past the hallway, past the now permanently empty wall, into the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror for the first time in weeks. I didn't look angry. I didn't look sad. I looked tired. Just so fucking tired. And I knew exactly what I was going to do next. The next morning, I woke up before her, not because I couldn't sleep, but because I had planned everything the night before. I made coffee like usual, left the house like I was heading to work, but instead I drove a few blocks away and parked behind an old gas station that barely got any traffic. I sat there for almost an hour, just waiting. I didn't check my phone, didn't listen to music. I just stared through the windshield until I saw him. He turned the corner, the same one I saw from the hallway vent camera, walking with the same careless pace like he had every right to be there. I didn't need a name. His clothes were too tight. His hair had that look like he spent too long trying to make it seem like he didn't care, and he had that expression on his face like the world owed him more than it gave. I let him pass me by before I pulled out. I didn't follow him far, just enough to get the first 3 digits of his plate when he parked behind the building supply store near the strip mall. I didn't need to know who he was right now. I only needed to know that he wasn't just a fantasy from some chat room or memory. He was real, he was local, and he was confident enough to come into my house like it was his. Back home, Emily was already in the shower. The door was open a crack, and steam had started to fog up the hallway mirror. The one I installed the day after she removed the other one. She didn't even question it. Didn't say a word. Maybe she thought I was trying to fix something between us. Maybe she just didn't care. When she came out in a towel, she acted like everything was fine. She even smiled at me, like she expected me to do the same. I didn't. I just nodded and said I'd be working from home today. She said she had errands to run and mentioned something vague about meeting a client downtown. Her tone was light, but she was watching me closely, probably trying to read if I suspected anything. I didn't give her anything to work with. "You want anything from the store?" she asked. "No," I said. "I'm good." She nodded and left without another word. The moment her car backed out of the driveway, I opened the closet and pulled out the hard drive I had connected to the hidden camera. I didn't want to watch it, but I needed to. Not just to confirm what I already knew, but to see what she looked like when she thought I wasn't there. She smiled more. She laughed more. Her voice sounded different, lighter, more relaxed. And it wasn't just sex. It was the way she touched him on the arm, the way she leaned in, the way she looked at him like she hadn't looked at me in years. When she returned 2 hours later, she was quiet. I could hear her in the kitchen opening drawers, putting something away. A bag rustled, maybe groceries, maybe something else. Then silence. No footsteps. No humming. Just that heavy pause in the air. I walked into the kitchen and saw her standing there, holding a receipt in one hand and the silver bracelet in the other. She must have taken it off and put it in her purse, maybe forgot about it. She looked up, startled, like she didn't hear me come in. "Hey," she said, her voice too quick. "Thought you were on a call." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at her, at the bracelet, at the way her fingers curled around it like it meant something. "Who gave you that?" I asked. Her smile twitched for a moment. "I told you. I bought it." "You didn't." She set it down slowly, then crossed her arms like she was cold, even though the kitchen wasn't cold. "Rob, I don't know what you think is going on, but I'm really tired of the suspicious questions. You had someone in the house," I said, my voice even, not loud, not calm either. Just plain. "You took down the mirror because you saw me looking at it. You thought I saw something. Did I?" Her eyes widened, just for a second. She didn't answer. Instead, she looked away, like she was trying to decide how far she could push a lie. "You're being paranoid," she said finally. "Maybe you should talk to someone." "I don't need to talk to someone," I replied. "I need you to stop lying to me." She turned and walked to the sink, stared out the window for a second, then dropped her hands to her sides. "It's not what you think," she said. "Then tell me what it is." "I made a mistake." "That's not an explanation. That's a line." "It was one time." "No, it wasn't." Her shoulders stiffened. She turned around, and her face changed. Not guilt, not regret, just a mix of cornered pride and annoyance. "What do you want me to say?" she asked. "That I'm a terrible person? That I hate myself? That I ruined our marriage? Fine, say it. Think it. But I'm not going to stand here and act like I did this all by myself. You've been emotionally checked out for months. You walk around like a ghost, Rob. I didn't go looking for this. It just happened. No, it didn't just happen. You planned it. You brought someone into our house. You let him into our bed. Don't try to make this about me being quiet. She didn't respond. She just stood there, eyes fixed on mine, not moving, not apologizing. Just silent. That silence told me more than anything she could have said. I walked past her, picked up my keys, and left the house. I didn't slam the door. I didn't raise my voice. I just left, because if I stayed another minute, I wasn't sure what I'd do. I spent the next 3 nights sleeping at a motel just off the highway, the kind of place where no one asks questions and no one remembers your face. I didn't tell anyone where I was. I turned off my phone, didn't check my email, didn't even open the laptop I brought with me. I sat on the bed most of the time, eating takeout and staring at the muted television, not because I was watching it, but because the silence felt heavier than the noise. I didn't think about work. I didn't think about the mortgage. I didn't even think about what she might be doing back at the house. I only thought about what came next. I knew there had to be something, but I didn't know what it was yet. On the 4th morning, I packed up my bag and drove home just before sunrise, knowing she'd still be asleep, knowing I could get in and out without facing her. I didn't go inside right away. I parked down the street and waited. The lights were off. The house looked the same, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. When I finally stepped through the front door, it smelled like her perfume again, too strong for that early in the day, which made me wonder who she had been trying to impress the night before. I moved quickly through the bedroom, grabbed the second phone I kept hidden in the drawer beneath my old work shirts, and walked back out to the car without closing the door behind me. I drove straight to a friend's place on the edge of town, a guy I hadn't spoken to in almost a year, but who owed me a favor. I didn't want sympathy. I didn't want advice. I just needed a safe place to park myself for a couple of hours and make the calls I needed to make. By noon, I had already spoken to 2 attorneys. The first one was all business, talking in numbers and probabilities and fees. The second one, though, he listened, not just to the details, but to the space between them. He asked me how long I had known, how long I had waited before doing anything about it. And when I told him about the camera, about the bracelet, and about the mirror, he didn't flinch. He told me exactly what I needed to gather, what I needed to avoid, and how to position things so I wouldn't lose everything just because I was the one who walked out first. That evening, I returned to the house with the specific goal of confrontation. I wasn't interested in arguments. I wasn't interested in apologies. I wanted the truth in plain language, not twisted up in excuses or softened with emotion. When I opened the door, she was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through her phone with that same empty focus people have when they're trying to ignore the world around them. She didn't look up. "I'm not staying," I said, dropping my bag on the floor. "I just came to talk." She looked up then, eyes tired, hair pulled back like she hadn't been outside all day. "Talk about what?" she asked, as if she hadn't been waiting for this moment. "You need to tell me how long it's been going on," I said. "All of it. No lies. No playing dumb. Just give me the facts." She didn't answer right away. She set her phone down slowly, then leaned back in her chair like someone preparing for a long meeting. "It started in September," she said. "At the gym. He was training there part-time, filling in for someone who left. We talked. It turned into something else. I didn't plan it." I interrupted her before she could drift into another monologue meant to justify everything. "Was it just him?" She looked away, and the pause told me more than I wanted to hear. "There were others," she said finally. "Not all serious. Not all physical. But yes, he's not the first." The air in the kitchen got heavy, not with anger, but with a kind of cold I hadn't felt before. I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, not to defend myself, but to keep them from doing something I'd regret. "So this whole marriage," I said, "was what, a safety net? Something to fall back on when you got tired of playing around?" "No," she said quickly. "It wasn't like that. You were real. We were real. But things changed." "Yeah," I said. "They did." She stood up then, walked toward the sink, turned the faucet on and off like she forgot why she did it. "I was lonely," she said. "You stopped talking to me. You stopped touching me. I felt invisible in my own house." I shook my head, not in denial, but in disbelief at how easily she rewrote the story. "You felt invisible, so you slept with someone else? You didn't try to fix it. You didn't even tell me you were unhappy." "I did," she snapped. "I hinted. I tried. You didn't listen. I don't respond to hints, I said. I respond to conversations. If you were really serious about saving this, you would have said something. Instead, you brought him into our house. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She just leaned on the sink, facing away, like she didn't want to be part of this anymore. I'm filing, I said. You'll get the papers next week. My lawyer will be in touch. I'm not going to drag this out, but I'm not walking away with nothing, either. Her voice came low, almost quiet enough to miss. I didn't want it to end like this. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. I picked up my bag, walked to the door, and didn't look back. Upon finalizing the initial legal consultation and initiating the procedural groundwork for divorce, the necessity to compartmentalize emotional responses became paramount in favor of executing a structured response plan. The objective was not only to mitigate financial damage, but also to reassert control over a situation that had long operated beyond the parameters of mutual respect. The strategy required the gathering of evidence, documentation of timelines, and formal communication to key stakeholders in our mutual social and familial networks to ensure a consistent narrative and prevent misinformation. The implementation of this strategy began with a calculated decision to disclose the truth to her parents before she had the opportunity to reframe the situation. I scheduled a visit to their residence under the pretense of discussing family matters. Once seated at their kitchen table, I presented the relevant facts with clarity and restraint. I provided no visual proof at that time, nor did I attempt to incite outrage. I simply articulated what had transpired, the affairs, the breach of trust, the breakdown in communication, and the subsequent legal steps being undertaken. Her father asked a series of direct questions, all practical in nature, whether I intended to pursue spousal support, if the house would be sold, and whether we had a plan for the division of assets. Her mother remained silent throughout the conversation, her expression a mixture of disbelief and quiet resignation, which suggested that this revelation had not come as a complete surprise. I answered each inquiry without embellishment, avoiding emotional language. The purpose was not to convince but to inform, and by the end of the meeting, both parties acknowledged the situation with the expected level of discomfort but also a noticeable absence of protest. Following this meeting, I returned to the residence for the sole purpose of executing what could best be described as a controlled extraction of personal property. The goal was to collect my belongings in one trip to avoid prolonged contact. I brought 2 friends, neutral parties uninvolved in the relational dynamics, to serve as witnesses and to expedite the process. Upon arrival, she was present and appeared to have anticipated my actions, though she made no attempt to interfere. There were no verbal exchanges outside of logistical coordination. I directed one friend to pack electronics and documents from the office, while the other handled the bedroom and wardrobe. The task was completed in less than 90 minutes. Subsequently, I turned my attention to the less visible, but equally important, aspect of retribution, not in the emotional or destructive sense, but in the form of reputational accountability. In situations of unilateral betrayal, particularly those that involve deception within shared environments, it is not uncommon for the offending party to maintain social leverage by crafting selective narratives. To counter this, I prepared a series of concise statements detailing the events from a factual standpoint, addressed to mutual acquaintances who had known us as a couple. These were not sensational, nor were they framed to garner sympathy. The objective was simply to clarify that the dissolution of the marriage was the direct result of repeated extramarital conduct on her part, corroborated by evidence. One such message was addressed to her employer, a professional courtesy designed to preempt potential workplace gossip or speculation that could arise from her change in marital status. I included only necessary information and emphasized that I was not pursuing any action against her professionally. Another was addressed to our homeowners association, as we had previously engaged in neighborhood events as a couple, and it was likely that questions would arise in that context. These communications were efficient, carefully worded, and devoid of inflammatory language. The goal was not humiliation, but transparency. It was during this phase of execution that I received an unexpected message from her closest friend, one who had previously remained neutral in most of our disagreements. She requested a meeting, stating that she had information she believed I should know. We met at a small coffee shop near my temporary residence. She arrived looking uncomfortable, and after a brief exchange of pleasantries, she handed me a sealed envelope containing printed screenshots of messages. These were between my wife and at least two other individuals beyond the one I had previously identified. The content was explicit, and the timestamps confirmed that the affairs had overlapped and continued well beyond what she had admitted during our confrontation. Her friend told me she couldn't watch the situation unfold in silence anymore, not because of loyalty to me, but because she had grown tired of the dishonesty. This confirmation, while painful, served a purpose. It validated my decision to proceed without negotiation. It removed any lingering doubts and eliminated the possibility of reconciliation from the equation entirely. There was no ambiguity remaining. The betrayal was extensive, calculated, and sustained over a considerable period. I did not confront her with this new information. There was no benefit to further interaction. My attorney advised me to submit the documents through the appropriate channels, which I did the next morning. At this point, the remainder of my actions were purely administrative, forwarding bank statements, closing joint accounts, redirecting mail, and securing individual insurance coverage. Each task, while mundane, functioned as a step toward autonomy. There was no celebration, no relief, only a gradual shift from shared history to personal recovery. The day we sat down for our final conversation, she had no idea what I was going to say. I made it clear ahead of time that I would meet her on neutral ground, and I picked a public place, not because I was worried about a scene, but because I wanted to keep the tone practical. We met in a quiet corner of a small restaurant we used to go to on weekends, not for nostalgia, but because it had booths deep enough that no one would overhear. She arrived a few minutes early and had already ordered a coffee by the time I walked in. She looked different, less defensive than she had been, but also distant, like someone showing up to a job interview they didn't want. She started to speak first, probably to steer the conversation, but I stopped her. "No, you don't get to direct this," I said. "You'll have your turn, but I need to get this out first." She nodded and sat back, her hands wrapped around her mug like she needed something to do with them. I didn't waste time. I told her I had seen the rest of the messages, that I knew the full timeline now, and that whatever shred of doubt I might have clung to about her honesty was gone. "I don't need another explanation," I said. "What I want is for you to hear what this did to me, not in abstract terms, but directly. I want you to know what it felt like." She looked like she might interrupt, but I continued. "For the past year, I felt something shift. You became a version of yourself I didn't recognize, but I assumed it was stress or boredom, or maybe something you just needed to work through on your own. I gave you space. I didn't push. I thought that was what a good partner did. I didn't realize I was giving you room to disappear." I told her about the nights I stayed up waiting for her to come home, wondering if I should say something, and the mornings I watched her leave the house wearing clothes she never wore for me anymore. I explained how I started noticing little things, how she never asked about my day, how she laughed at her phone but never shared the joke, how she flinched when I touched her shoulder in the kitchen. "It's not just about the sex," I said. "It's about trust. You let someone else into your life in a way you wouldn't let me. You gave them your time, your attention, your secrets. You made a conscious choice not just once, but over and over, to lie. To me. To my face. And you did it while still expecting me to be the man who showed up for you." Her expression didn't change much. She looked at me like someone sitting through a long presentation they knew they couldn't skip. "I'm not telling you this to get even," I said. "I'm telling you this because I want you to carry it. You don't get to walk away pretending this was mutual or inevitable. You chose it, and I need you to live with that." She finally spoke after that, quietly. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to hurt you. You hurt me the first time you lied," I replied. "Every time after that was just maintenance." She looked down at her coffee like it might save her from the weight of what I had said. She stayed quiet for a moment, then said something I didn't expect. "I don't think I ever knew how to be married." It was an odd thing to admit at that point, but I let her talk. She said she had spent years trying to convince herself that what we had was what she wanted, but deep down, she felt trapped by the roles we fell into, by the routine, by the quiet. "I needed to feel something," she said. "That doesn't mean it was right. It just means I wasn't built for this." I nodded slowly. "Then you should have said that a long time ago. We could have ended this without burning everything down." She didn't disagree. She just looked tired. She told me she had spoken to a lawyer and that she wasn't going to fight me on anything. She said she didn't want spousal support, didn't care about the house, and would take whatever settlement made sense. "I don't want anything from you," she said. "I don't even think I deserve it." I believed her. For the first time in months, I believed she meant exactly what she said. I stood up then, not because I was angry, but because there was nothing left. "You'll get the final papers next week. After that, we won't need to speak again." She nodded and stood up too. She didn't offer a hug, didn't ask if we could stay friends, didn't say she was sorry. She just walked out of the restaurant and got into her car. I watched her pull away, and then I walked back inside to pay the bill. After everything was said, after the paperwork was finalized and the last of our shared accounts were closed, I found myself back in my own apartment, which still didn't feel like home. It was functional, neat, quiet, everything exactly where I left it, but there was no sense of familiarity, not in the way it used to feel when I walked into our house. That wasn't nostalgia or longing. It was just the absence of noise that used to come from a shared life, even one as broken as ours had become. I didn't keep any of the furniture, not because I didn't want to be reminded of her, but because it all felt like it belonged to someone else's story. I bought a used couch, a basic dining table, a mattress on a simple frame, and some shelves I never got around to filling. I wasn't interested in building a new life just yet. I just wanted to sit still for a while without having to explain anything to anyone. Most of the people in our old circle had already chosen sides, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet, practical way people do when they don't want to be involved. A few reached out. One of our neighbors sent a short message saying they were sorry things ended the way they did, followed by an offer to grab coffee if I ever wanted to talk. I didn't respond. Another friend I hadn't spoken to in years messaged out of nowhere, claiming he had seen something coming and had always thought she wasn't trustworthy. I didn't reply to that either. It wasn't helpful, and it wasn't honest. People like to pretend they see the signs after the damage is done, like it makes them smarter or more observant, when really they just want to feel involved. I spent most of my evenings walking, not because I was trying to clear my head, but because I didn't know what to do with myself from 7 to 10 anymore. I used to fill those hours with dinner, dishes, whatever show she was into that month, maybe some emails if I still had work to finish. Now I walked through neighborhoods I didn't know, past houses where families were eating dinner or watching television, past dark office buildings and empty parking lots, sometimes just down long residential streets where the only sound was the dull hum of porch lights and the occasional passing car. I didn't think much during those walks. I didn't make plans. I didn't process feelings. I just moved because being still too long made me restless. Eventually, I started seeing a counselor. It wasn't something I told anyone about. I didn't go to figure out how to fix myself or to get advice about starting over. I just wanted someone to ask the right questions. He didn't say much at first, mostly listened, took notes, occasionally asked me to explain how I felt when something happened, not in a dramatic way. Just simple questions like, "What did you think when she said that?" Or, "Why didn't you confront her earlier?" At first, I had answers for everything. I explained my silence as strategy, my delay in confronting her as patience, my calm as control. But after a few weeks, I realized I was repeating phrases I didn't fully believe. The truth was simpler. I hadn't said anything because I didn't want to know. I didn't want to hear her admit it. I didn't want to face the fact that I had failed to see who she had become. One evening after a session, I sat in my car in the parking lot and just stared out the windshield, not thinking, not trying to remember anything, just sitting. I realized then that I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad either. I wasn't numb, and I wasn't relieved. I was just done. Completely, finally done. There wasn't anything left to fix or unpack. There wasn't.